And now it's my great pleasure to introduce Jamie Carter. I met Jamie a long time ago. I don't know if he remembers, but Mel Tillis' Second Theater over there. Jamie and I used to work for Mel Tillis. I worked when he first opened his show at the theater there on 65 with the rain curtain, and I worked there for several months, and used to date one of his daughters. And Mel was just just a great person. And I know Jamie took the reins and turned that place around and made it a little more professional, and everything I've heard. And also Jamie produces a show that my guitar player John Lance plays in, so we have these connections. We both worked as roadies and soundmen down in Branson, Missouri, and it's my pleasure to introduce Jamie Carter.
See, I'm used to doing that type of move. Thank you to the board. That's fine? Good?
Well, loosen it and bring it up.
I don't know how to do that part, Chris.
Yeah, I thought you did.
But first of all, my name is Jamie Carter. I go by James R. Carter III officially. That's the parental thing, and you'll see that on a few pieces of paper here and there that are of legal value. But I'd like to thank the board for having me up. I've attended several of these meetings over the past year and really enjoyed what I've seen and what I've heard, and really respect the fact that people can get together and kind of celebrate the area demographically, what the music and the entertainment world can do in Springfield, Missouri, or the Ozarks in particular. I find that very interesting. Probably more so because I'm from here. I was born here in Springfield. I was raised in Marshfield, Missouri, which is a small community about 30 miles up I-44. And back in those days, things were a little different than the technology that we have in today's world. I loved music. I could have cared less about television. I would read constantly and get everything that I could get in my hands to find out anything I could find out about music, whether it was a band, a group, an artist, how to read music, how to do anything that I could possibly find. Because in those days, of course, the internet didn't exist. There was no YouTube. It was just a limited situation. Even, the school systems and things, band didn't really hold an interest to me, because I was, at the time, I was listening to Deep Purple and I wanted to be a rock star and all this nonsense that a lot of people probably go through at that age. But I did try to reach out as much as I could, and there's a few people here today, Mr. Tom Whitrock, for example, and Mr. Mark West here, that were big influences when I was a youth. I would, as a young teenager, beg my parents to drop me off in Springfield for the day, and I'd go to Tom's shop and dream of, will he let me touch that guitar on the wall, and try to pick his brain as much as you possibly could, because if you know Tom, you know that he is a true authority on instruments. Same thing with Mark. I was kidding with Mark earlier. He was talking about some things that we did not so long ago, really, about thinking that was maybe where our careers had crossed paths. But I wanted to remind him that I was also the guy who was stealing my grandfather's farm trucks from Marshfield and driving in the early morning hours to get down to what was the venue in Blue Eye, Mark? Swiss Villa. So that I could be on his cruise to unload the semi-trucks and drag cable and sweat, and just so I could be near something that was happening in the music business. And so I really, really wanted to, I don't know, it was this passion that I had for it. I couldn't let it go. I couldn't just say, okay, I'm going to calm down and I'm going to pay attention to school and I'm going to do what my parents ask and so forth. I really, really dug into it, I guess is the best way I could say. So I started listening to every type of music that I could find. My father had a wonderful LP collection and gave me free rein with that, and he had everything from Miles Davis to Frank Zappa to who knows what. And so I self-exposed myself to those things, and I'm the kid that missed the high school parties. I'm the kid that didn't go out on weekends because I had just, discovered Frank Sinatra, and I was going to listen to everything I could get, from either buy or get it from the library or whatever, because I had to know what this guy was all about. And it was kind of a funny running joke in the family that I didn't realize the television made noise till I was a teenager, because I was always playing the stereo. And so I was very thankful for that. And I was also very thankful for the fact that my parents and my grandparents on both sides were really supportive of, if there was a concert going on somewhere, or there was a performance, or if I needed something, as far as an instrument or strings or whatever, they were always really, really supportive in that. I did make some gigantic mistakes, though, along the way. Number one, I had the opportunity to go to college, and I attempted that. But at the time, I had moved from Marshfield into Springfield in my late teens, and I had started playing in bands and working in music stores and hanging out with Lou Whitney as much as Lou could stand me being around. And I got so immersed in it that I actually figured out that, hey, I can pay my rent if I do this. I can buy a car if I work on this. So I was, like I said, working in music stores. I was bothering Mark to death with, hey, can I do a load-in with you or whatever, and on and on and on. And, of course, playing in the club scene around town. And getting into that type of thing in Springfield, the club scene in my day, which would have been the mid-'80s, through the late and very, very early '90s, it's a lot different than what it is now, and there's a lot of reasons for that. And of course, ownerships change. Money is always a factor. Popularity of different strands of music or genres or whatever is always a factor. And I got into some really great situations by entertaining the idea of being around the people that I thought were really, really the people to pay attention to in town. And, I'm from this small community. I don't know any better. I'm very, naive of things. But I was also clever enough to talk my way into clubs before I was 21. So I was getting into Murphy's all the time. I knew Bob personally. Gary L. Thomas was somebody that I befriended and had him convinced I was 24 when I was really 17, and things like this. So it was never a problem getting in to see all these great acts. And that brings me to the locale, being in the local issue. I brought a thing that I've had laying around that my mother saved years ago that Ron Sylvester of the News Leader put in the paper, and he was writing a particular piece about different musicians in town, and he did a special on guitar players. And so the great Bill Brown was, the big photograph, and of course Dave Painter, who I unfortunately I haven't kept my relationship with Dave Painter like I should have, and I do regret that, but I consider that guy probably one of the greatest guitar players I've ever seen, been around, and was very fortunate to get about 6 months worth of lessons from him when I was younger, and it literally turned my whole thinking process around. And of course, in that same article is Speedy Hallworth. And for those of you who ever got to witness Speedy play or heard him on record or just be around the guy in general, you knew that he was absolutely just a true gem of a human being, regardless of the fact he was one of the finest guitar players in the business. But anyway, I got to goof around with all those. And again, that's when I was hanging out at Third Eye Music. We were always at the Rock Shop, which eventually turned into Sounds Great. And of course, you guys had Lee Coates in last month, and I was always bugging Lee when I was a kid, and trying to get sheet music or whatever, and on and on and on. But I got into playing in bands and trying to, create my own direction in this. And so I did a lot of things of discovering that, you can play a club and you can play covers, but, you can make $50 a night or whatever here and there. But what is that? Where is the, where are you going? What are you doing? How are you trying to, what is my purpose of doing this besides just being able to jam with somebody or have a fun night of playing in front of people? So I got into writing and started doing a lot of my own original things and making records and figuring out 4-track recorders and discovering this microphone does this while this microphone does that, and on and on and on. And that led me into the whole idea of, I'm not the greatest guitar player in the world. I'm not going to be a rock star. It's not, these things aren't going to happen. So I had this personal reckoning, and I thought, I need to reinvent myself. And if I want to be in the music business, the most important thing that I could probably do is learn to diversify. So I immediately started trying to attach myself to even more musicians and more writers and more people in the area. And so that's when I got involved with people like, I don't know if anyone's familiar with David Bonin, but David Bonin was a fixture guitarist in the area for years. And of course, Kevin Brashears, who to me is one of the finest bass players in the area. Craig Bridwell was another one, great musician. And what Craig showed me was not only can you be a musician, but you can do the engineering. You can do everything. You don't need anyone. You can do this yourself. And so I really went with those guidelines and tried to go forward with that. And then I got some really lucky breaks. And one of those breaks was after I had played and beat myself up and thought I knew what I was doing and on and on and on. I got the chance to go to work for the great Mel Tillis. And if you didn't catch it earlier, I don't care about, I don't have a genre. I don't believe in genres in music. I just don't. If it's good, it's good. And what I got from Mel was first of all, he wasn't this guy you saw on TV. He wasn't this guy who put out records. He was an artist. The guy was a songwriter of songwriters. He was a wonderful poet, and not to mention possibly one of the greatest people I've ever known. And Mel did a really fortunate thing for me. He took me in, and he said, here's what I do. Here's what I want you to do. Go do it. And basically, I have this established star with massive budgets and owns multiple companies who just said, do it. Just go do it. And after you get over the essence that you could fail at every turn, and you realize that there are rules to music, there's rules in the business, but none of them apply if you're trying to do something for the better of the people around you, that it really became a journey that I literally look back on it sometimes and can't believe that it happened. I mean, it's been a dream. I can drop names all day long. I mean, we all can, but working with Mel provided me with chances to work with people like Harold Shedd, and if you're not familiar with Harold Shedd, Harold is probably, in my eyes, one of the greatest producers to ever work in the Nashville vein. I mean, Harold was responsible for people like Alabama, Shania Twain, the list goes, Toby Keith, the list goes on and on and on forever. And by being associated with Mel and Harold, I got to work with people like Jim Cotton, and Jim Cotton was the engineer of the Music Mill in Nashville. And if anyone's ever if you're familiar with that scenario at all, those people were cranking out more hit records than anybody during their heyday period through the 80s. It was a pretty unbelievable place to experience. So that being said, I really got back into the composition, how songs are written, how these pieces come together, and how you structure a band, and how the arrangements come together, and how you talk to musicians, and how you gap the relationship between the engineers, the musicians, the producers, and so forth. And I really enjoyed that. That was the world I wanted to live in, because to me that was an interesting thing of total creation all the time. And when you could get with the right group of guys and the right time and the right moment, and some of you have probably experienced this, but when you get that perfect take, or you hear that song that just really dives into your mind and into your soul, there's nothing that tops that. There's no money in the world. There's no reward in the world that really can just make you have that feeling of, wow, that just happened and I was part of it. I can't believe that this is real. Play it back. So I can't express that enough. That's an incredibly enjoyable thing to me. And so I got back into what I said earlier about being, diversifying in the business. So being a self-taught musician, I'm always and still am studying music. I still study composition. I still try to, sight read every day. I sit down at the piano and plink around. I've always got a guitar within 3 or 4 feet of me, except at this particular moment, but I'm sure there's one in a car somewhere out in the parking lot. But I can't give that part of myself up. And being with Mel and being able to walk into those situations, it was probably the most fortunate part of my career. And then there was the other side of Mel. There was the entertainer side of Mel. Now, if you're familiar with Mel, a lot of people are, Mel did stutter. He literally at times could not get a word out. In fact, in the studio, we had legal pads and pens laying everywhere. And at first I thought those were for, if you get an idea to jot it down. A lot of the time he would get excited and those were there for him to write down what he wanted you to do or what was happening because he just couldn't get it out. And that was very real. And that impressed me too because he took something that was I wouldn't consider it a disability, and I know that he wouldn't, but he took that and turned it into a character that really brought him into people's homes, made him a real staple in the entertainment community, through film and television and what have you. Real quick funny story about that. When I first went to work for him, I was there about a month, and he called me into his dressing room, and that was always something that nobody wanted to go to Mel's dressing room. It was never going to come out good. And he calls me in his dressing room and he hands me this piece of paper and he says, "Read this." And I'm like, okay. And I'm thinking to myself, it's a complaint or it's a lawsuit or it's, somebody came to a show and was offended or, what have you. And so I'm reading it down and it's a group of citizens who had put a petition together that wanted to ban Porky Pig from television. I'm not kidding. I actually still have this document. And so I'm reading it, I'm trying to put pieces together. What's this have to do with me, Why am I here? And I said, well, that's fine and good, but, I like Porky Pig. I thought it was a great character, and I hand the paper back to Mel, and he just looks at me very, very sternly, and he says, "When I was a kid, Porky Pig was my hero. I'm not signing that." Like, okay. So then I realized, okay, here's the world I'm working in now. I don't know where that all came from, but we'll move on from there. But back to Mel as an entertainer, he became a really big fixture in the Branson community. And let me explain why, because I know that there's always been kind of an odd rift between, production and musicians and all these things, and the Branson community is kind of its own weird, bizarre world. And the deal was back then, you have to remember, the record company, the record business was changing drastically. And country music, the powers that be at the time were looking for new faces. So within about a 12-month time period, Loretta Lynn, Conway Twitty, Willie Nelson, Waylon, Merle Haggard, Mel, of course, all of these great icons of country music were all dropped from their labels. I mean, they dropped them like hats. And it was a culture shock because a lot of people don't realize this, but at the time, Mel's band had 24 guys in it, and they all had families, and there was a 10 to 12 man crew, and there were managers and artist relations, and there was the publishing companies in Nashville and the studios in Nashville. So he had this gigantic workforce that now all of a sudden, we're not getting royalties anymore. Our checks are all dropping off. Our airplay's going down. The business is crashing. What do we do? How do we reinvent this? So again, through my diversification and through, Mel's ideas and friendships and relationships, he came to Branson. And he came to Branson under the invitation from Roy Clark. And Roy and Mel were very, very close friends. In fact, if I had to brag about a relationship, I would say that Roy Clark the way he's treated me in the past 25 years is, man, you get a chance to hang out with that guy, just don't miss it. He's absolutely a wonderful human being. But Roy had invited Mel into the Branson community, and Mel came in and thought, hey, you know, we could probably make this work. You know, people are here. They want to be entertained. We can do it at a really, really cost-efficient ratio, and we could maybe we could do this. So, of course, he rented a theater for a season, and this is all before I really got involved, and tried to make that work. And they saw good profitability, and he thought, well, you know, I can keep all my guys working. I can sing every night. I'm in control now. Nobody's telling me what to wear and what to do and how to do this and that. I can do this. And so that grew into basically 3 theaters later, and you know, it's been probably 2006 or 7 or so. I actually sat down one afternoon and got all of my calendars out with him, and in Branson alone, since I had come on in 93 to 2006, we had logged in over 6,500 shows in Branson. And that number to me was just astounding. But then when you look back at it, and we were doing 9 months out of the year, 2 shows a day, 7 days a week for most of the time period, it does add up. And I was kind of taken aback by that, because I thought, I can't believe we actually did that many shows and nobody's killed anybody. And that was one of the great adventures with Mel as well. Doing that many shows and having that much time together, it really, instead of it getting mundane, it just got funner and funner and funner, because his band, the Stateside, possibly the greatest country music band I've ever worked with. They just were extremely funny, charismatic, creative people. And Mel got to the point where he started missing doing songs, writing songs and producing other artists. And he got to missing that. So we had hired Russ Berger of Russ Berger Design Group, which if you've ever looked at a copy of Mix magazine, I'll guarantee you've seen one of his studios on the cover of this magazine. Russ came to Branson. We built that gigantic place out on 248. And we put a world-class recording studio in that place. So then not only were we doing shows constantly down there, but every spare minute that we could be in the studio, we were still writing songs, we were still making records, we were still trying to stay somewhat valid in the business one way or the other. And that was really great, because that led me into getting to work with people like Pam and, you know, his daughter, and doing records with her, and countless other people. And my first real close to having the Grammy Award experience was done in that theater. There's a gentleman named Jimmy Sturr, and Jimmy Sturr is a polka artist. And I used to giggle about it too, until I got to know this guy, and then I realized these people are serious, man. This isn't drinking beer and carrying an accordion around. This is serious business. And Jimmy came to town, and he had asked Mel to be part of a project that he was doing. And Jimmy puts out a theme type polka record every year. You know, one year it's a rock record, it's a gospel record, a country, you know, he has a different thing. And he wanted to do a Western swing style thing. Well, that's right up Mel's alley. Mel is a Western swing guy. I mean, Spade Cooley and Bob Wills and all of these cats, man. These were Mel's idols. And so we put this thing together, and man, it won a Grammy. I couldn't believe it. I mean, I'm like, wow, here I wanted to hang out with Richie Blackmore all my life, and I got my name on a Grammy record for the guy that plays the accordion. I mean, so you know, I didn't scoff at it, but, you know, it was kind of a twisted event in my mind, you know, of how I perceive things to be going. So all that aside, one thing that I can tell you about Mel that has impacted me probably more than anything was I met my wife there. And my wife Tamala is a Ballou. Her father was Tommy Ballou, which some of you might have known from being in the Christian County area. But most importantly, she was a Mabe, and her uncles were the original 4 Mabe brothers that started the Ball Knobbers in Branson. And she, along with her father, Tommy, and her mother, Joanne, were the quartet on the gospel show. And so if you've ever listened to any of those great old recordings, that most of them were done right here in Springfield, some of them by Nick Sibley, and I'm losing names on Pat Shikani was another one that was involved in this. If you've ever listened to any of those old records and you hear this little bitty super high voice that's just incredible pitch and tone, that's my wife. And she had came on as a stutterette, which Mel branded them that name. Her and her younger sister Tanya, and they spent 17 years as stutterettes in the Statesider band with Mel, and did the records and did the touring and the whole 9 yards. And so we were such a close-knit family, and we literally were working 18, 20 hours every day of our lives. It was just kind of a, wow, that's a gorgeous girl up there singing, and I'm going to get to know her, and so that was a really great blessing for me, and she is absolutely my partner in crime all the time, and her and I, it's been a really great blessing because we share this love of music and entertainment, and got to work together for so many years. And a lot of guys go out on tour and they lose their wives. I went out on tour and couldn't wait to see mine, so that really worked out for me. But as we all know, I could tell Mel Tillis stories till the end of time, and I'm sure that some of them are entertaining and some of them are offensive. But but that is the game. But Mel did fall ill a few years back, and he went through some pretty serious bouts of illness, which was really shocking to all of us that were in the circle, because he was always this 6'4", straight-backed, perfectly dressed, person that never ever got sick, never had a cold, never had anything wrong with him, and he didn't. We used to joke about it. He never even took medication of any kind. Nothing. He was just this epitome of health, and his health deteriorated, and he battled it, man. He fought it. He had a heart thing. They went in and did some heart work on him. 30 days later, we're back on tour, like it never happened. The reality of his downfall as far as his health was he got a condition in his colon, and they had to go in and remove pieces of it and put it all back together. And then, of course, unfortunately, a lot of people that go through that procedure, you deal with sepsis, and he had multiple infections. And the first round knocked him down for about 2 months, but then again, we were right back on the road. We were right back in the studio. I mean, it was amazing. I mean, we thought this guy's going to outlive everybody. He just kept on going. But eventually, the workload and things, it really pulled him down, and it was an incredibly sad thing to witness. But on the upside of that, despite the fact that he couldn't be out on the road, and he couldn't be singing, and he couldn't be entertaining, and he couldn't be writing songs, he still worked. He finished his first novel, got it published, which was unbelievable to us, and I thought about that for a while. He was a poet. He was an author. If you ever got to speak with him, and I know Chris did, he was the most unbelievable storyteller. You felt like you were sitting with, Mark Twain telling a story when you were in the room with this guy. And so he finally put something together in his head, and he wrote it down, got it published, and it was a fantastic piece. And he also continued to paint, which was a passion that he got into later in life. And with his stuttering, we did a lot of work with the Freemasons and Shriners, and Mel was a Shriner, and he would paint these amazing paintings, and they would auction them, and the proceeds would always go to a children's hospital of some sort. And so we were very involved in that, and I was really, really proud to be part of that. But when all that kind of started going down, I kind of looked at retirement. I thought, what am I going to do? I just did 24 years with this guy, and we've done everything that you can possibly do in the music business. And a really great friend of mine, Mr. Steve McHale, who I really cherish my friendship with this guy. But Steve is probably, if you're familiar with him in any way, he's probably the best live engineer I've ever been around. I mean, this guy's amazing. For example, in the heydays of U2, the biggest tours and productions in the world, Steve was Bono's personal in-ear mix guy. I mean, it's this guy, I really looked up to him and I learned a lot from him. And when Steve had left U2, he went to work for Mr. Steve Miller. And that sounds like a really, you're out doing these world tours and then you're coming back to an artist that is in a whole different, spot in his career. But I was very interested in that probably more than any of the other big artists that we had worked together with or what have you. And the reason being was, again, I like the songwriting. I like the production. I like making the record. I love taking the record and going out and touring the record and seeing all of these different aspects of being able to communicate something to the public. And that's what Steve Miller is all about. The guy is an amazing songwriter. He's one of the greatest guitar players on the planet. And oddly enough, he probably has one of the largest collections of instruments I've ever seen. I mean, he's an enthusiast beyond enthusiast, a very brilliant human being. But as the story goes, Steve, his godfather was Les Paul. And so if you know any history about Les Paul, a lot of people know Les Paul as the musician, but they don't realize that Les Paul is also the guy that invented the multi-track tape recorder. Okay? So Steve, being a kid with Les Paul in and out of his house all the time, he was privy to these things. He had these toys to play with, and he really dove into it. So as a musician, he's probably one of the better engineers on the planet as well. I mean, the guy, he knows the ins and outs of how these things work. So when you pick up a copy of Fly Like an Eagle, it still stands up today. I mean, it's absolutely brilliant in the way that it was written, produced, recorded, the whole 9 yards. So these are my interests. I want to do these things, and I am doing these things. But I find that when you work with these people that are very, very into these trends of life and trends in the music business, you learn exponentially. And so my journey with Steve Miller has been absolutely phenomenal, man. I mean, the first year I was with him, we cranked a record out that year, and did a full 60-plus date tour on top of it, all over the world. And so my dreams of fading into black, as they say in the film industry, here I am right back in the middle of it again. And I'm still fortunate enough that we're gearing up for our 2017 or 2018 tour. And again, we have Peter Frampton out as support with us, and that is if you get a chance to see that package together, please do. It's a pretty big deal to see those guys play and sing together. It's an amazing event. But anyway, very general idea of where I've come from and where I've been, and if I could take this a step further in the other direction of where I'd like to go, as everyone does, we all get older. And in my time, I would like to see myself more involved in the Springfield area. I've worked in and out of town forever, and I have found that to search out my dreams and my goals, that I've literally had to go to the ends of the earth to do it. And so I'm trying to turn my ideas and my philosophies into being more local again, if that makes sense. So I've done a few things, like I started doing a lot of recordings in the area with local artists and local bands, and seeing what they're doing and seeing where the music business in the Springfield area is going, because literally the music business on a national or even international level is really not going anywhere. It's getting more and more limited, despite the fact there's more and more people to enjoy it, if that makes sense. I mean, if you really look at the idea of the 78 or the 45 being a single, and then LPs coming out and these long playing records and double records, and then CDs and longer length and playing, and now it's all the way back to the single again. It's almost done a full revolution, and so I kind of see that in the public too. My kids are very brilliant engineers and musicians, and they make me aware of things that are going on that I don't pay attention to, because as I get older, I tend to not really, don't really get as adventurous as what they are in youth. And they tell me things like studies that they read and things about how, streaming music is basically background noise now. No one buys records to listen to them. They're just on for 15 seconds in the car here and there, or they're a blurb behind some media video frenzy or what have you. And at first I was argumentative with them about that, And I still am to an extent, because I can go out on the road with a guy like Steve Miller and we can sell 20,000 tickets a night, and the people are more excited than I've ever seen anyone to see this show. And so that still leads me to believe that people will always seek out live entertainment, especially if it's good live entertainment. And I believe that. I totally believe that. That's why we still have club scenes. That's why Branson is still rolling. That's why the casinos in Las Vegas are, they spend more on advertisement and production than they do anything else to draw the people in, and that people come to see these productions. But as far as the recording industry and those types of things, it's just so washed out that it's really hard to get anywhere anymore. The 360 deals that go on now with artists that are, they're brutal. The artists cannot be themselves. They're basically a brand, and what you see is what you get. And so it makes it harder to seek out people that are really trying to be creative and really trying to touch someone or say something, in that form. I was really excited to see one of my dreams in the Springfield area is I'd love to get involved with the Springfield Symphony. I'm a giant classical music fan. I love symphonic music. And I saw an advertisement on television the other night about they're doing their series this year, I guess, on revolution. And I thought, man, that's just perfect. Because when people say revolution, they think about, the Revolutionary War, or they think about, the race issues or what have you. And when you really dig back into what Mozart and Beethoven, Chopin, all these the greats as they're referred to, that's what a lot of their music was really about. I mean, it was about the time frame that they lived in and what was going on, and it was very controversial in the time. So I thought that was kind of fun that, I was thinking along the same lines as whatever the symphony is doing, and I thought, man, that's cool. We need to figure that out on all genre basis, and get these things back into the schools and get these things back into the hands of young people that aren't turned by what the local, or not local, but whatever MTV is playing this week, or shoving down your throat on radio stations that are playing the same 20 songs every 24 hours or whatever, because it's out there. It is. There's artists right here in Springfield that I've worked with that are some of the most intellectual and entertaining and aspiring people I've ever met. I mean, there's a guy here in town named Jeremy Larson that just knocks me out. Look this guy up. He's amazing, and he's into everything, and it's just it's inspiring to see that. So don't get me wrong, I'm not getting down on it. I just see it in a different fashion, and I really wish that it could remain to where people that are wanting to put out records could support themselves by doing that, so they could continue to deliver these gifts that are from God, to transpire through them out for other people to enjoy. And I have a lot of strong feelings about that, but we won't go that far. Anyway, I got a million things I could talk about, but we usually do a Q&A towards the end here.
Yes.
Go ahead. Fire away.
You mentioned those words from Mel to you, what he wanted you to do. So I want you to answer that if you could. But what were those words? But what the heck is your job title? What do you call yourself? What do you do?
Well, that's fun. That's a fun question for me, because first and foremost, I consider myself a musician, but primarily I produce. And in the producer's seat, that's a pretty broad area. Because the job could be, look, I got a show here and I don't know how to get the band there. I don't know what material these people want to hear, blah, 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 blah. Make it happen. Put it together. Get the advertising right. Make sure the bus is going to run, all that sort of thing. And then it also means that, we sit down and we think, wow, we got this really great song. And here's the direction that I want it to go in. So let's hire the correct arrangers. Let's hire the correct musicians. Let's set a budget together. Let's pick a studio that's going to create this right ambience for this particular thing, and let's put that together. So that's pretty much my seat, really. I'm the guy that artists will throw this idea at, and I figure out how to make it happen. Whether it's, like I said, a show or a record or a video or whatever, and so that's kind of how I look at myself, more as a producing type role. In the Branson community, I was really fortunate to be able to have liberties that most people would never get in this business, because when Mel would put these theaters together, he just gave us carte blanche on it. I mean, literally, our budgets were whatever it takes. So we were hiring, scenic designers from New York, from Broadway, and we were bringing in other producers from TV shows that he worked on in Los Angeles, and we were the first fixed position theater in the world to ever have a Clare Brothers PA system. And Clare Brothers was, at the time, the largest touring company in the world, and so we cut a deal with them to do a fixed installation, and we were the first to ever do that. We were also one of the very first to ever have a Verilight system, because back then Verilights were strictly for touring, and you couldn't purchase them; you could only lease them. And so I was very instrumental in setting up all these deals and making these types of things happen. And so,
I don't know. We put a Verilight system in the press release before.
well, I said that we were one of the first. I didn't say we were the first.
What was it, Mel? What was it, Mel?
Those words from Mel, what did he say that, here's what I do, here's what I want you to do? What were those words?
That was pretty much it. That was pretty much it. And the funniest part about the conversation was that was like one of the very first times we'd ever met, and he never actually hired me. He never said, you've got the job, or here's your salary, or here's an office, or anything like that. He just said, do it, make it happen. And at the time, he was going into his second year at what now is the Yakov Smirnoff Theater. It was the theater that Mel built with Mr. Hall in Branson. And we were putting together a production. Roger Miller had just passed away, and Mel and Roger Miller were extremely close friends, very close. And Mel had decided he wanted to do a production of Big River in Branson. So that was kind of my first endeavor with him, was to make that happen. Although, after the first week of starting to put that show together, we have one day off, and he says, hey, after the show tonight, we're chartering a plane to Nashville. I need you to be on it. And I'm like, okay. And I didn't ask why. I didn't think about it. I just thought, okay, I don't get a day off. We're going to go to Nashville. And we went to Nashville, and we walked into the Mill, which is where I had first met Jim Cotton and Harold Shedd. And we had the Kentucky Headhunters in there, and they were cutting one of Mel's songs. And the next thing I know, Mel's like, I don't like this, this, and this, and this, so Jamie, you get in there and do that. And I'm like, okay, scoot over, Jim, I'm going to do this, So it was kind of like just this anything goes. It literally, I call it my three-ring circus, because I have no idea what's going on, and I don't have a whip or a chair, so, But that's how you learn. I mean, that's been my experience. I mean, most things that you learn in life, you just got to jump in and do it. And so I took what little knowledge I had and jumped in and did it.
Here's your question. Some of us worked for the old Ozarks Jubilee here in town.
Yeah.
Which is a great adventure. And when it finally stopped, a number of the people went on down and were instrumental in the beginnings of Silver Dollar City.
Oh, absolutely.
And everything set, designed, entertainment and all that. What was your experience with them? Did you know any of them?
No, I didn't, but through family. Again, my wife being part of the Mabe family, I have an extremely blessed relationship with Bob Mabe.
Yeah.
And Bob is the last living brother of the four ball knobbers. And to sit with that guy, you guys need to do a week on that guy. I mean, I'm not kidding. Bob has told me some things about how things went on around here back then that was just absolutely outstanding. And one of the things, and a quick relationship note, when the Ball Knobbers would open their shows for their seasons, and of course I wasn't there then. This has been many, many years ago. One of the things that Bob would do to promote the season was he would bring in whoever the hot artist was out of Nashville, and that was part of the Ball Knobbers marketing scheme. And that's, he had a relationship with Mel even back in those days, and because he brought in Mel, he brought in Hank Williams Jr., he brought in Dolly, he brought in all these other artists, and so that was kind of a cool thing to learn about. And also a cool thing to learn about from Bob was the fact that way before the Ball Knobbers, he was part of the Jubilee. He was a DJ and a staff musician in town, on the radio, and I did this. I'm always trying to come up with brilliant gifts for my wife, and so last year for her birthday, you can only buy so much jewelry and flowers and candy, and so I thought, what can I do to really grab her? And so I went on this amazing journey of trying to just collect really old Ball Knobber, anything, memorabilia, photographs, recordings, whatever. And so, of course, I beat up Bob, and went through all his stuff. And, of course, I talked to Brandon Mabe, and Brandon gave me great things that they had in storage, and talked to the kids and the family and so forth, and even got on eBay and, bought everything that anybody would come up with on eBay. And some of those recordings and songs and photographs and just the way that they did business, man, it was epic. I mean, no wonder the show's still there now. I mean, it was just brilliantly done. And it's funny because a lot of people in nowadays with the way things have changed throughout the years, the way people look back, they look at these album covers and look at these guys with blacked out teeth playing washboards and all this nonsense, and they think, oh, what is this goofy stuff? Really? Go listen to those records. Yeah. And boys could outplay anybody on the planet, and they all came from that Jubilee circle and all the things that were going on at that time. So I'm real proud of all that. I mean, I am. In fact, I'm proud of it to the point where when we left Branson, when Mel decided to get out of Branson, we had a really fortunate thing happen. We had a gentleman, Mr. Green, who was the owner of Hobby Lobbies and so forth. He wanted the property for some reason. I don't know why. And he approached Mel several times, and Mel, no. We love this. This is our home base. Everything we do is here. We want to be here. And he finally did the Godfather thing on him and gave him an offer he couldn't refuse. And so, man, we packed up and left. And it was good for us, because at the time we were venturing out. We were doing more television again. We had the band was going through some really great phases, and so to be back out on tour full time was a really amazing thing. But wow, I totally lost where I was going on that story. Where was I going on that story?
The last thing I was going to say about that story is that a local musician became quite well known down in Branson, Dean Billingsley.
Oh, absolutely.
Wonderful guitarist and a great performer, and became an excellent sound and lights man.
I go to church with him every Sunday.
He's a
Yeah,
great guy.
I love Dean.
Many people in the room know him very well.
No, Dean's he is doing good. He's had a little bout of illness, but he's bouncing back, and he and his wife Lucy are doing really well. But I guess the point of where I was trying to go with that was, we never really thought about the Branson community like most people do, because we were still touring, we were still doing records, we were still in the scene. We hadn't just retired to Branson, and so when we got the chance to get out and go back on the road full time, it offered up a lot of different opportunities. And then when we finally cut all of our ties with Branson, as far as the Mel Tillis and Statesiders go, and we performed up until 2016. We were there. We had a really, really great opportunity presented to us by Mr. Mike Patrick. Mike called my wife and wanted her to be on their television show that they broadcast out of Grand Country, which, by the way, is just taking off like wildfire. And that became a pretty good relationship of letting them go down and be able to still perform as the Stutterettes or as Tammy and Tanya instead of, the Ball Knobber Phases or things like that, kind of give them their own identity. And then he offered us a spot in the Sunday afternoon, and the Max Bacon family were down there for 27 years, and they decided that they'd had enough. and they had a wonderful show there, but that slot opened up, so Mike presented a deal to us. And after I had sworn a million times over that I would never get back into that grind of doing 1,000 shows a year and trying to figure out how to paste it together with Band-Aids, I'd never do it again. We got a wonderful opportunity, and we snagged it, and that's what the poster is there in the middle on the table is one of the promos that Mike put together for us. And so they do a Ozarks Gospel and an Ozark Country show. The Gospel show's at 2 o'clock matinee, and the other one, the Country show's a 7 o'clock show. And I decided that when we put that together that we were gonna try to, do it as professionals. And because I know there's a lot of things that go on about, people are not getting paid what they want to, people are jumping theaters, the money's all wrong, on and on and on. And through Mike Patrick and the guys at the Grand Country, they allowed us to kind of have carte blanche on what we wanted to do. So since we're doing 2 shows on 1 day a week, I can't hire some guy for $35 to come in and play guitar for the day. Those things, that doesn't work. And I wouldn't do it. I don't expect anyone to do it. I'm very adamant about that. So we held auditions, we got the ideas, we wrote the shows, and I snatched up Jim Garstang, who was Mel's band leader for 36 years, to be the band leader for this. And he helped us arrange and write the show as well, and helped us put the band together. I got James Ingle playing drums, and if you're not familiar with James was with the Gatlin Brothers. He played with Roy Clark for years. I mean, this is a real drummer. This is a real touring guy, real touring veteran. From the Brumley family, I have Tom Brumley's son, Todd, playing bass. So we tried to find like-minded people that had the time, that were interested in doing it with us, and so I'm very proud of what we've done in that community right now. We had an amazing season last year. We just opened our second season, and it's really, we look for, we have no days off anymore, but we still look forward to it because we're getting to be in our element again, so to speak. And back to Bob Mabe, it's probably one of our prouder moments when he comes to tell us what we're doing wrong.
You seem to have accomplished on a lot of levels. You look like you're about 25.
Oh, well, there's a compliment that I'll have to pay you off for later. No, I am not 25, but
Rock and roll keeps you young.
well, you know what? I joke about this a lot. If you, I don't. A lot of people in my circles do. If you stay away from the bad things in this business, and we all know there are a lot of them, there's a lot of different abuses, there's a lot of different things that you can get wrapped up in. If you get your mind straight and get yourself in the right frame of mode and dive into the work, and trying to be creative and be proactive instead of reactive, I think that helps a lot, because I see a lot of entertainers out there that are in their late 60s to early 80s that look like they're 50, and that's why, because they believe in what they do, they don't stress about it, they don't worry about it, they're there to put a good vibe in the room and make music and entertain people. And I think that reserves a lot of people. I mean, even at 84 years old, Mel's still, he looked like he was 50, man. I mean, it was amazing. And I think that attitude has a lot to do with it, but that also applies to anything, any lifestyle, any career. So
Tom, you had a quick question?
I just wanted to know if you were doing much the same with Steve Miller and what it was like.
No, I'm not. When we started slowing things down with Mel, I started doing things that were more me. I really turned myself not away from my career, but I got more involved in my church. You know, my wife, her brother, her father was the pastor of the church, and when he passed away, her brother took over the church, and I can't wait to get there. You know, I'm a very studious person. I read constantly, and I really, really enjoy studying, you know, the biblical aspects of things. And so, that being said, my kids have grown up, and I've missed a lot of that. And so if I had to say I have a regret, that is part of it. Although I did take them on tour, you know, I was joking with Robin earlier. I was the guy, you know, we were the parents in trouble with the school systems because we were yanking our kids out of school to go all over the world with us, you know. And I was also joking about the fact that we did everything we could do to keep them out of the music business, and that failed because they're both musicians and touring engineers. And in fact, they're flying in this afternoon from finishing a tour with Daniel O'Donnell. They have his account, so so that part of the life didn't work out. But no, I think I want to be home. I'm ready for grandkids, and don't take this in a vain aspect, but I'm in a place in my career where I can kind of choose what I do, if that makes sense. I have that luxury right now, so I don't have to go out with whoever or whatever. But back to finishing the answer for Tom, knowing that I don't have to wear all those hats was a really great relief at that point. And when I got the call to go to work for Steve, it was basically, you're just going to mix Steve's in-ear monitors. And I thought, wow, how cool would it be to go on a tour and all I have to do is worry about this little bitty part of this gigantic animal. And of course, it is a gigantic animal within itself, because dealing with Steve is quite a revelation, because like I said, the guy is absolutely brilliant. He knows more about music, knows more about instruments and equipment than anybody I've ever met. So when he turns to me and tells me to do a specific frequency at a specific numeric value, you do it because he knows if you did it or not, you know. So, and a lot of guys would veer away from that, but I kind of embraced it because I thought, cool, if that's all he wants me to do, this is a piece of cake, you know. And so I enjoy that, and I enjoy my relationship with him because, you know, he's the kind of guy that Steve really values. Creative people and musicians, photographers, artists. He really values those people way above and beyond, you know, what he does. People that, you know, in different types of careers, and you can probably understand that, meaning like management and so forth, you know, because there's always that battle between artists and management. But he's really a friend to the arts, and so to be able to work in his environment and get in his world, man, it's a serious privilege to do that. And I've found that I've got a fairly good relationship with him because he and I can talk about guitars. You know, we can talk about strings and pickups and different bridges and different manufacturers, and this year was a better year than that year, or what have you. And we can also talk about music. You know, we can look at charts and talk about, well, you know, the chart says this, but, you know, let's try to rewrite it and maybe make this happen. And something that I really didn't hit on that I wanted to was I got to learn a lot working with Mel towards the end of his career, you know, all the way to the end of his career. And there was a lot of things that went on with his age, you know, of I'm not singing like I did 20 years ago, or I don't have the stamina that I did 20, which wasn't really the case with Mel, but he did 3-hour shows every night. But I learned a lot of how to deal with an artist going through that phase, you know, in their career, and that's a really odd thing to. Somebody needs to write a book about that, because it's strange how someone who's in the limelight and popular and all of these great things are going on around them it kind of regresses, but it doesn't regress to the public. I think that it does more in their personality. They get more refined, and like Mel, we would go in and cut 20 brand new songs that he just wrote in his studio, and we were excited about putting a new record out, and he'd turn around and stick it on the shelf, and nobody'd ever hear it again. And figuring out why he would do that, you know, what was his purpose, because he was just as excited as we were when we started the project, and the projects were great, you know. And I see those things working, with other artists that are in that age demographic, and I'd like to figure out how to help them more, go on. I'm sorry, I'll talk all day. I
You've
know.
done this. Thank you. Yeah, it's clear there.